Stephanie Case, so good to see you. Welcome back to the podcast.
I am so excited to be back chatting with you again.
Where in the world are you at this moment? I know you travel around, you bounce around more than most. Where are you right now?
I am happily in Chamonix Valley at the moment in my new home in this little French village called Servoz.
Oh my goodness. Well, yeah. I can't wait to be there along with the rest of the trail running universe in a couple of months. But you have been on the podcast twice before. It's been a couple of years. We have a lot to talk about. But first, congratulations on winning the Snowdonia 100K. Maybe start by telling us how you're feeling after your return to racing.
Oh, thanks. I feel great. My legs feel good. My watch is telling me that I'm tired and I'm going too hard, but I feel really good. It's, I think when you have a good race performance, you kind of come back with a bit of a glow, and my legs recovered incredibly quickly. And I think I have my new fueling strategy to thank for that. And my coach, Megan Roche, Dr. Megan, either that Dr. or it's McDonald's. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, congratulations. And I want to hear all about it. This is probably the 1,000th interview you've done since your amazing victory. It went somewhat viral. What does it feel like to be a viral internet sensation?
It's weird. No, it definitely went viral. And in multiple languages, multiple countries. It's kind of transcended now into mainstream media, the non-running world. And while it's great, if there's a good message that's going out there and if it's inspiring people, love it. But it's super weird for me because what went viral was this photo of me breastfeeding at an aid station while I'm shoving a piece of watermelon down my mouth. Now, for me, I was just doing, I think, what a lot of moms out there do. I was multitasking. I was running a race. I was feeding my daughter, and she was a bit fussy at that aid station. So I was kind of feeding her while I was bouncing. So I was standing up, bouncing, breastfeeding, saw some watermelon, ate the watermelon. I didn't even think twice about it. It was just a normal thing. And so the fact that it has caused such a reaction, I find a bit strange because this should be normal. And this is normal in our world, right?
Totally. And maybe it encapsulates everything that makes Stephanie Case the person she is. You are somebody who, at least from my perspective, is the queen of multitasking. And we've talked all about that in your previous appearances on the podcast, so people can go back and understand more of what I'm talking about. But yeah, I was just chuckling, thinking, if CNN, People Magazine, and Free Trail are all covering the same story, something interesting has happened in the world. So, of course, the big story after Snowdonia was that you did it after only six months after giving birth to your daughter, Pepper. You've been very open about your fertility journey. So I would love to talk about that with you here, because I think it's perhaps maybe the most important lesson, or the thing that might have the most impact on our listening audience. So maybe just to get that started, if you could high level summarize that process for the audience, the timetable and some of the ups and downs before you were gifted with this beautiful child.
Yeah, so it started about 3 years ago when I ran Hardrock in 2022. And I was super excited about how I did there. I managed to squeak out a second place, but 7 hours behind Courtney DeWalter. 7 whole hours.
She leaned at the tape and narrowly beat you by 7 hours.
Yeah. I was chasing her down. She'd already had a nap, showered, and eaten a couple meals by the time I crossed. But anyway,
no shame in that. A second place at Hardrock is a second place at Hardrock.
Yeah, it felt good. And I was flying back to the Middle East where my job is. And I hadn't really had a chance to properly celebrate. And so I thought, I'm just going to go get myself a bottle of champagne and have a glass of bubbles at home. And something just told me to take a pregnancy test. And I found out I was pregnant. And it wasn't something that had ever really been a goal of mine. And I thought that it was probably past me. I was 40 at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But, in that moment when I saw the pregnancy test, and then especially when I had my first scan and I saw it was the size of a poppy seed. And so I called her Poppy. So as soon as I saw Poppy, I just, I felt this protectiveness. I felt this energy. And I was like, I am a mom. And it changed everything in that moment. And then unfortunately, I miscarried. And while miscarriages are super common, even in 2025, we're really still not talking about it enough. And it means that people are suffering this very common occurrence in silence. And you don't really hear about it from people until you've experienced it themselves. It's like this secret club that actually no one wants to be a part of. But I found out a family member had suffered one that I didn't know. There are so many female runners who are going through this who aren't public about it. But when I went public, they shared, their experience with me, and it was so telling, and it just made me rethink how we approach this whole journey. The fact that we still don't tell people that we're pregnant until after the first trimester, just in case something happens, we're only protecting other people from the uncomfortable situation that they might face if they hear that you've been through tragedy.
Yeah.
Because if you don't tell people you're pregnant until the second trimester, just in case you miscarry, it just means that you are going to suffer alone.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I was really rocked by that whole experience. And some very well-meaning people kind of questioned whether it was Hardrock, because I was actually in the very, very early stages of pregnancy when I ran Hardrock.
Yep.
So they said, was it the
and
running?
You obviously didn't know that.
No.
Yeah.
I think I just had a little bit of fun before Hardrock, and
yeah,
there you go.
Yeah.
But yeah,
that's how it works.
Whatever works.
Sure. Yeah.
But there's no science to say that there is this. Sorry, you're smiling. You know that I was going to start to be like a reverend early on in this podcast. So
this is great. This is perfect.
Yeah. Anyway, there's no science to say that there is this link between miscarriages, pregnancy loss, and physical activity. But we just tend to kind of think of women being these like really fragile beings. And, once you're a mom, that's kind of all you are. And because this seed of doubt was planted in my head, I knew logically that there was no connection between the running and the miscarriage, but it just changed the relationship that I had with running. And suddenly running was no longer something that I could look at to relieve stress and to give me joy. It was something that maybe, I didn't know, probably not, but was holding me back from becoming a parent.
Yeah.
And so I really scaled back from my running, got pregnant again, and miscarried. And then the questions were, oh, well, is it the stress of your job? And I'm like, well, goddamn, I used to run to deal with stress. So I just felt like I couldn't win. And then I went through IVF, and it is such a physical, emotional, financial journey.
Yeah.
And very difficult to try to keep up with running. And I still had this dark cloud hanging over my running identity, I think.
Yeah.
And no matter what the science would say or what anyone would tell me, I just kind of knew that I wouldn't feel fully comfortable really reclaiming that running part of me until Pepper was on the outside and I saw her healthy and whole. And yeah, I had to wait until that point.
So in total, how long were you trying to start a family before Pepper was born? This was a multi-year journey, right?
Multi-year journey. Yeah. So I had 2 miscarriages within about 6 months, 6-7 months. And then I went through 2 rounds of egg retrievals, 3 rounds of IVF plus a mock round, which was quite intense. And it wasn't until the last transfer, which was February 2024. So it was over 2.5 years that I was going through this.
You and I think, have talked about this, but I feel compelled to share it with the audience because our stories are somewhat similar, and I don't want to go into too much detail because I don't have my wife's permission explicitly. But we had a very similar story where for most of our relationship, we were unsure whether we wanted to have children. Mm-hmm. And then Harmony took a positive pregnancy test, which was unplanned. And we were over the moon with joy and excitement. And unfortunately, that pregnancy didn't work out. And it was very sad, though we also came to the understanding that this is not uncommon, that our experience we weren't alone in having this experience. And then, what we carried forth was a, explicit understanding that actually we do want to have kids and we really do want to go on this journey. That's what it taught us. And it took maybe 6 months for us to get pregnant again. And of course, now we have a nearly 3-year-old toddler boy. But one thing I would love to get you to comment on is just kind of the mystery of this process, because oftentimes when you're dealing with fertility issues, you don't know why. Is it a problem with mom? Is it a problem with dad? Is it a problem with lifestyle, as you describe with running and your stressful work environment? How do you maybe say a few words about that unknown, how you were grappling with the mystery of the why you were struggling with it?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think especially for runners and for athletes to answer, because, as runners, there's a pretty direct correlation. You could plot it on a graph between effort we put into training and result. If you are given everything you got and you're paying attention to strength work, nutrition, hill strides, whatever it is, time on your feet, you'll generally do better than if you just kind of winged it. When you try to have a family, there's really no graph that can show this direct correlation. There is no direct correlation. Oh. And when you go through IVF, there's part science, there's part voodoo. It's just, it can be luck. And it's actually really unfair of who is successful and who's ultimately not successful. I mean, I can remember growing up watching the 16 and Pregnant show, and it seemed like people could just get pregnant like that.
Well, that's the thing. I have friends who they get pregnant on the first try with multiple kids. And then I have friends who it's taken a year or more.
Yep. And for me, what was confusing was that, I seemed to get pregnant very easily, naturally, twice. And then suddenly when we had all of the science, we did genetic testing to make sure that our embryos we had perfect embryos, and we had a whole room of people putting it in the right spot. It failed twice. And I thought, I can do this on my own at no cost with some margaritas. And I can't get to the same point by spending an exorbitant amount of money and having all of the science behind me. So I think it's a really tough thing to grapple. You have to really let go of any sense of control and just know that the most you can do is to just do everything that you can and somehow find peace in the fact that, for me at least, I was doing everything that I could. And no matter how it turned out, I had to at least be okay knowing that there was no stone left unturned. But honestly, talking about the voodoo part, when it came to the last embryo transfer, I was doing everything. So the pineapple is a symbol for IVF because there's this kind of myth that if you eat the pineapple core, it will help implantation. Again, science doesn't say it, but I'm like, whatever. So I was wearing a pineapple hoodie. I had pineapple socks. I had read one study that said the presence of medical clowns in the room after the embryo transfer increased pregnancy rates by 15%. And so I bought a red clown nose into the room, and I asked one of the nurses to wear it. And she, God bless her, wore that clown nose while I was doing my embryo transfer. And you know what? It worked. So for anyone who's trying it out there, just do whatever you have to do, because you just don't know. And sometimes you need a little fairy dust.
Superstition sometimes does work.
Totally.
You've mentioned this in a couple of your interviews, and now I think at least once here in our convo. But I'd love to have you share. You don't have to go into details, but like you've mentioned the financial expense and the sacrifice of your running. And I know you at least grappled for a time with, do I need to step back from work, which I know provides a lot of purpose in your life. Can you share a little bit about the sacrifice? You don't need to share the amount of money you spent on this, but I think this is an important thing. Yeah. Like, not only was it an emotional struggle, but it came with real world sacrifices.
Yeah. I mean, I think the main point is that, like, I'm so privileged to be able to have a job that can give me the income to be able to spend on IVF. But, you know, my parents also had set aside some money for, you know, a wedding someday, which I don't have on the horizon. So I spent the wedding money on the IVF. So I am super privileged, but, you know, I've got this great healthcare plan that covers IVF if it's medically necessary. And somehow I'm deemed it's not medically necessary, even with recurrent miscarriages. And the whole healthcare system just seems to be set up to screw you when you actually want to have a baby. But it's a massive investment, and there's no end in sight. You can keep spending money for as long as you want, because there always seems to be another treatment and there's always another try. And I think this whole area is quite loaded. You know, the medical profession, or at least the fertility kind of industry, gives women the sense that if they just freeze their eggs, then, you know, everything will be fine. But they don't tell you, even if you have 20 eggs, you might not get a single embryo out of that. And women are in incredibly vulnerable states. And honestly, they could have told me, like, you know, you need to spend X amount of money to, buy a whole army of clowns to be there during your embryo transfer. And I would have done it. I would have spent every last dollar in order to have a successful pregnancy. Yep. So there's that. There's the physical side. It is crazy
though, how parenthood does change that attitude of like spare no expense, nothing else matters but this, you know?
Yes.
And you don't understand that until you're in it, do you?
But it does. You know, I was quite nervous about all of the needles. I mean, you are like shoving needles into your stomach multiple times a day, and that just becomes the norm. I think over the course of a year, I added it up. I mean, it was thousands and thousands of needles. And I've got, you know, memories of kind of hiking around Tour de Géant, where I was just spectating and crewing. And it was right after one of my first embryo transfer. And I was convinced it had worked. And I was so happy. And I was out there on top of a mountain, shoving needles in my stomach, you know, going up and kicking along. And it didn't work. But
were you struggling? Like once it did land and you were pregnant and you were moving through trimesters, were you still grappling with fear that it wasn't going to get across the finish line?
Absolutely.
So to speak.
Absolutely. I had a threatened miscarriage really early on. I started bleeding at about 5.5 weeks, and I thought I had lost the baby then. And luckily I didn't, but every day that I was still pregnant, I just celebrated. And it didn't matter. Even when I got past the first trimester, I've got friends who have miscarried in the second trimester. And then you worry about abnormalities. And then you worry about stillbirth. I have friends who've had a stillbirth baby. So it just didn't matter what the stats told me, because I'd already beat the stats in a negative way through my own experience. So until Pepper was out, I was on the edge, and I tried. I went into the doctor 3 times to try to induce, and she finally let me at some point, because I just wanted her out. As soon as she was viable, I was like, let's get this baby on the outside, and, you know, we're off to the races now.
Yeah. So a little over 6 months ago, you did become a mother. Yeah. Your daughter's name is Pepper, a wonderful, beautiful name. I wanted to ask you where that comes from.
Yeah. Well, her full name is Pepper B. And it's actually this connection that John and I have to two friends of ours. So I have a friend who had miscarried around the same time as me, and her last name was Pepper. And so I wanted to kind of make something good come out of what was a kind of trauma bonding. And then B is actually for Bruce, which was a climbing friend of John's, my partner, who they'd been friends for over 20 years, and he had died quite recently. And so we decided, instead of kind of setting Pepper up for lifelong therapy by naming her Pepper Bruce, we named her Pepper B.
Yeah. So I want to talk about your return to running, but maybe before we do, maybe just adding a finer point to your relationship with running through this process, because, I just went back and looked at your race results just to make sure I hadn't missed anything. But as you mentioned at the top of the show, you haven't raced since Hardrock 2022.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you to just talk about that, because it seems like those two things are probably not unrelated, that there was intention to stay off the race course as you navigated this process. How did it impact your relationship with running?
Massively. I mean, I wish I could have. I wish I could have kept running and racing and coming up with plans. But when you want to become pregnant, it is so hard to put a race on the race calendar, because it's like admitting in advance that you're not going to be successful.
Yeah.
And I needed to be all in. I needed to be all in on trying to get pregnant. And I didn't, even superstitiously or whatever, I didn't want to make any plans in any kind of universe where I wouldn't be pregnant. And it was tough, because for the last, 15 years prior to that, my whole life and yearly calendar was based on what races I was going to be in. You enter into lotteries, and once you find out what you're going to be in, you structure training and vacation and work and everything around that. And that anchor was gone. And that part of my identity, it felt like it was gone. When I describe myself, I'm a human rights lawyer and an ultra runner. And I thought, can I describe myself as an ultra runner if I'm not ultra running?
Yeah.
And so in the postpartum phase, coming back into the sport, it was so much more than just, trying to get some fitness. It was so much more than that. It was about trying to find that part of me that had been dormant. And it showed me, once I started running again, that part of me had always been constant. I had always been an ultra runner. It was just taking a little nap. And with all of the physical and mental changes and everything you go through childbirth, which is crazy, and becoming a new mom.
Yeah.
It was really comforting to know that I had one part of me that was still there, and that, okay, I don't really know how to define myself now, to describe myself. I don't know what my value is going to be in this new state as mom. I've got questions about career, identity. It's like, you really, everything gets thrown in the air. But I could say, okay, I'm still a runner. And yeah, that made me think that I really hadn't lost anything during those 3 years.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, hopefully it comes back for me then too. You're my inspiration, but
it's there.
You posted that you returned to running about 6 weeks after giving birth under the guidance of your midwife, physio, and new coach, Dr. Megan Rose. Share a bit about that process, because I'm sure there's women in the audience who are curious about what the return to run looks like, and any support structure that you had around you to help you with it.
Yeah. And it's really important to talk about the support structure, because so many women are not able to come back that quickly. It can take months or years, and some people struggle to ever come back. And so I'm very lucky, but it did require a lot of work. So the whole birth part, terrible, traumatic, couldn't sit down for weeks. We can gloss over that, but just to say, this was not
crazy.
It's crazy. So
I'm still reeling. My son's almost 3 years old and I wasn't even the one who gave birth.
It's
the wildest 12 hours of my life. My God.
12. Yeah. I had 48.
Jesus.
But as my partner would say, it's not a competition.
My
if
goodness.
it was, I lost. Yeah. Where were we? Okay. So I couldn't have imagined coming back to running so quickly when I was just a few weeks postpartum, but at 6 weeks, I went to the doctor and I said, okay, am I cleared? And she's fantastic. She's used to working with athletes. And she said, Stephanie, it doesn't matter what I tell you because I know you're going to run anyway. So let me give you what you need so that you can do this properly. And the healthcare system here in France is great. You get 10 sessions totally free to do pelvic floor rehabilitation with a midwife. You get 10 sessions to do rehab on your abs. And everything is fully covered and it is so critical to do. Super weird. I'm going to be explicit, warning, but like just picture standing half naked on a trampoline, with a strange woman with her fingers up inside you while you jump up and down and cough. I mean, that's basically what we're talking about here. This is not like a video.
Wow. Yeah. Not your typical physical therapy.
No. So, that's what I did. And I'll also be explicit in the next part because I think it's important. This is educational. There's like a cube you can wear up your vagina to hold your bladder in. So I ran the whole 100K race with like internal gadgets.
Whoa.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. That's a whole other element, right?
Moms.
You can edit it out if you want. But,
no.
People don't talk about this enough. So I am.
Yeah. So interesting. So talking about the race itself now, after setting so much context, I really appreciate you sharing so much about that story. I do think it will help a lot of people. And I want to come around and put a bow on it at the end, because I think you have a new phrase that you can be known for that I happened to spot somewhere on the internet. But speaking specifically about Snowdonia for a while, share a bit about the event and why it was the right place for you to return to racing after nearly 3 years.
It was a bit serendipitous. Once I started training postpartum, I started to get, I just started to set higher goals for myself, because originally I'm signed up for Hardrock. So I'm going to be returning to Hardrock in July, 3 years after, where this whole journey started. And my original goal was like, wouldn't it be great to come back after 3 years at a race where I got second and then come like dead last and show people how hard it is to get through pregnancy and childbirth. And that's why we need these great deferral policies, pregnancy deferral policies. And I thought that would be my message. But now I've got a different goal. And once I started training, I was like, let's come back to Hardrock and just like do as well as I can.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to have a race to get rid of the nerves and just make sure I knew, how to put one foot in front of the other again.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried to find a race that I could do, but so many races were either full or they had qualifications I couldn't reach. I wanted to do Transvolcania, which I had done back in 2017, but you had to have completed a 50K race after January 2024. And I don't have one.
Wow.
And I emailed the race organizers and they never wrote back. And
couldn't you say, hey, bro, I did Tour de Glacier, twice, 3 times?
That's kind of what I said. Like, guys,
Tour de France, for Christ's sake. This is a 75K.
It's like, I can do this. Yeah. But I never heard back. And there's no setup for that kind of a thing. And so I found the Mozart 100, which it was the 100 miler. You didn't need a qualifier. It was still open. I'm like, great, I'll sign up for that. And then I found out that the Mozart 100 is a very fast 100 miler. And in talking with UTMB, because I'm a commentator for UTMB. And so they said, look, we can actually get you into another race that suits you better if you'd like. And Wales, the race in Wales suited me much better than the one in Austria, the Mozart 100, because it's technical, it's gnarly. I could do the 100K instead of the 100-miler, which I thought was smarter.
Somebody described it as Hardrock at lower elevation. And actually, Mike McMonigal was also there. I think he did the 100-miler, and he posted about how underappreciated the place is. Yes. Maybe you could describe the area. And I mean, I'm personally curious what the running is like. Does it feel like Hardrock at lower elevation?
In some ways, I mean, it's gorgeous. It's got beautiful ridge lines. There are some parts where you're not running on a trail. You're just kind of plowing through a field with like giant holes. But there are parts of the course where you are really scrambling. Some might call it climbing, but you are going straight up a vertical wall of rock and then going down shale. The thing that makes it probably easier than Hardrock is that while the climbs are really technical and gnarly, they're just not as long. So we're talking about 600-700 meter climbs at most, rather than 1,000-meter plus. Yeah. And if the weather is bad in Wales, it would have been, I mean, it would be horrendous. It would be a really tough course. We were quite lucky to have good weather, but yeah, it's a great course. And so I was able to get a spot, but I had no UTMB index. So I was put, Okay. So part of what makes your story amazing is that you started with a major disadvantage. So share that piece with the audience. So because I had no UTMB index, I was automatically put in the third and last starting wave. So it meant I started half an hour behind the leaders. So there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of runners in front of me. And I asked if I could jump up to even the second wave, but quite understandably, they'd gotten a lot of requests and they said, no, you need to start where you are, but don't worry, you'll run by the chip time. And honestly, it took the pressure off because I knew that there would be bottlenecks. I knew I'd be, in conga lines climbing up these climbs and trying to weave past people on technical descents. So it meant that I wouldn't be able to run that fast. And I just thought, perfect, pressure's off. I don't need to worry about going that quickly. And it meant that I didn't know where I was in the course, or in the pack, I should say. Normally spectators will yell out, but no one could really yell out what place I was in because I was all mixed in and had started at a different time.
Being away from the game for a little while, what was the state of your competitive drive? Were you approaching Snowdonia with a competitive mindset, or was it just rip the Band-Aid off? Especially given the fact that you started with a 30-minute disadvantage.
Yeah. Well, and actually what was quite funny is that some of the news coverage, it makes it sound like I was just late. Like I was just a mom at home and I like casually rocked up to the line 30 minutes late and then just finished. So I did want to clarify, no. But yeah, I honestly wasn't going in with any kind of competitive mindset because I really had no idea. My longest training run was 50K. I hadn't gone more than that in years. And so I just wanted to be able to have a good time. I wanted to find that joy in running again. I wanted to take advantage of the fact that like this would be my longest time out there, just me. But I was aware that it was also my longest time away from Pepper, kind of on a sustained basis. And I wanted to get the checkpoints, the breastfeeding at checkpoints done properly. And so if I was in competitive mode, I would have been coming into those checkpoints and really rushing Pepper on the feeds. And I didn't want to do that. So I explicitly avoided knowing where I was in the pack. I had a guy with a camera following me at different checkpoints. And he asked me, do you want to know where you are? And I said, no, because I knew that would put me into competitive mode. And I said to him, I think early on, I said, I think I'm running fast. So I knew that I was going faster than I thought. But I'd made it really difficult for John and for the camera guys because they wanted to know an estimate. They're like, when do you think you're going to finish? And I was like, I don't know. And they're like, 30 hours, 20 hours. Like, what are we talking about? And I said, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't even want any kind of estimate because it was going to kind of put a mark in the sand. And then if I didn't meet it, I would feel like I failed. So I didn't want to have any idea of what I would be doing.
Okay, I want you to describe your aid station transitions.
Yeah.
6-month-old kids do require mom around all the time.
Yeah.
And even when mom's away for short periods of time, they notice it. And when they come back, they really do need mom. So share a little bit about how you and Pepper interacted at the aid station.
Yeah. Well, she had me up early from about 2:30 in the morning. My start time was 5. So we had a nice cuddle early on. But runners were allowed to receive assistance at 20K and 80K. And then I got permission from the race organizers to provide assistance to Pepper at the 50K, but John couldn't help me at all. So at the 20K mark, I came in and John was great. He did all of my bottles and all the logistics. And I just sat down on a bench out in the sun and just fed Pepper. And that was quite nice because we were kind of separated from everyone else. And so it went fairly smoothly. But the 50K mark was difficult, as now she'd been away from me for quite some time. It was inside, a tent or inside a building. And so there was lots going on. There were lots of other runners. My race bib was making this crinkly noise that she kept getting distracted by. And John just had to sit there and watch while, I needed to do Pepper and then figure out how to get my water bottles filled. And I tried to eat a bit of pasta, but I couldn't really do everything at once. So I just tried to focus on feeding Pepper. And when I gave her back to John, like her lower lip started going and then she started crying. And I could tell she just wanted to just hang out with sweaty mom. And that was really hard. And that's when the mom guilt came in. I thought, like, what am I doing? I should stay. And I was happy to stay if she wanted more milk, but she just wanted to hang out. And so that was really hard.
If you had to estimate, how long did you spend sitting around at aid stations feeding your daughter?
I think you can actually see it on the live tracking thing. Because John looked at it. Yeah. I think I'm right in saying when John looked at it, he said that in total, I actually spent less time at aid stations than the second and third place women.
Wow. So efficient feeding.
Yeah, I think it's just because it was still an hour though. But I think I just kind of cut out my own stuff. Like because I was relying on gels and my own carb drinks that I was carrying with me and put in my drop bags. I wasn't really getting much stuff from the aid stations. I think that watermelon was pretty much it. So
did John have a crew too? Now I'm thinking, the dad's also got a tough life. He's trying to crew for mom out there while wrestling with a 6-month-old who probably doesn't want dad around at all and is just crying for mom the whole time. Did John have a support system?
His parents and his best friend were actually out, but it's funny. I think having a kid, it just makes you more chilled out. You can't sweat the small stuff. So we were chaos in the aid stations. We hadn't talked about what I needed. I didn't make him a list on what to put in my drinks or what I might want switched out. And I would come into the one thing that we talked about was that I wanted pizza at 80K. You know how I love my pizza during the race. Yeah. And I was thinking about it for so long. And I came into 80K and I'm like, where's my pizza? And the look on John's face, oh my God, he just knew. He's like, did I mess up? Did I mess up? Was I supposed to have pizza? He had no memory of us ever talking about it. And we both just laughed because, it was about Pepper and we were just doing the best that we could. And he was amazing. He was amazing and taking care of her all day. Yeah.
Okay. So now we got to get around to, how life and running has changed in the last 3 years, because in one of your interviews, you said that it felt like riding a bike, that you hadn't lost anything. And to me, I'm like, that's bullshit. Like 3 years away from the sport, you can't help but have to knock some rust off of the system. So I would love for you to just expand on that and just tell us about like how you're feeling physically and mentally being back out on the race course only 6 months postpartum after 3 years being away from the game. Did it feel like riding a bike? Seriously?
This is going to sound arrogant, but like so much better. Like the training, when I started training, it felt rusty for sure. But when I used to run and train, I would just go out on the trails. Sometimes I would remember to bring water, maybe a bag of chips, but really I was not very focused on trying to do a particular workout, or I never did strength work. I never did stretching. I never did intervals or hill strides. I never took gels. I would just go run, because the whole purpose of running for me was to just relax, deal with whatever was in my head coming from work. And, if I happened to perform in a race, great.
Yeah.
But now, because your time is under so much pressure when you're a parent, this, every hour that I would, negotiate with John or, figure out to be able to go out on the trails, I wanted to make the best use of it. And so honestly, having Megan as my coach has like completely transformed my running. And now I'm on the gel train. I'm on the high carb. I'm on the high carb train, and I'm doing the hill strides. I'm doing strength work, and I feel so good. I haven't been that focused on and efficient since I first started ultra running when I was 25.
Wow.
And like I've done well at races before, but I do well at the stupidly long races where there are like 3 women. I won 100K. I would have never won 100K before. Like 100K is fast.
Yeah.
It just wouldn't have happened.
What an inspiration. Okay,
yeah. I don't know. I mean, we just have this idea. And that's why I say, there's no comeback after pregnancy. It's just the next phase, because one, it's setting an impossible standard for many people that they'll feel badly about themselves or feel disappointed if they don't reach, but it's also setting a ceiling. If I said I was coming back, to my pre-pregnancy fitness, then I don't think I would be as good as I feel like I am now. I don't know.
It's so funny. I was texting with Steven Kirsch the other day, who's also a new dad, and he won the Lake Sonoma 50 miler earlier in the spring. And
that's awesome.
Mentioned sort of tongue in cheek that I have a secret resentment for people who are able to still run fast after they have children, because I've been totally unsuccessful in doing that in my own life. So maybe you and Kirsch can become my parenthood shred advisors.
Exploded, right? Like you are doing so much in the trail running space. So like, there's so many things that have changed for you and that are pressures on your time. It's like,
but you're like an international humanitarian lawyer, Stephanie. So I'm a freaking podcaster. No, it's different. No. But anyway, I want to come back to your story here. Okay. Tell the audience you crossed the finish line and you genuinely, it seems like, have no idea where the hell you finished in the field. Tell us how you came to understand that you won the race.
It was so fun. Because from about 95 kilometers, I was dry heaving. I'd pissed all over myself. I was like, I had a drone following me at some stage when I just like needed to pee. I was just like, let's get this done. Let's get to the finish. And I really wanted, the sun was setting and I really wanted to finish before it was dark, just to say that I never had to take out my head torch. I don't know. It was just in my head. That's what I wanted to do. So the end of the race, you're kind of on a path that's very smooth, and then it's road, it's downhill. I was flying, and I just deep breaths. I was just sprinting and going to the finish line thinking like, what a great day. I'm going to finish this race. Everyone's happy. And I crossed the line and there were a whole bunch of cameras there. John was there. The race announcer was there. And they said, look, we're just doing some calculations, but we think you might have won. And I was like, what?
Excuse me?
What? and then I looked at John and he's like, it was really close. He's like, maybe 90 seconds. And I'm like, what? And then they did the calculations. They looked at the chip time. I'd won by like 3 or 4 minutes. And I repeated it probably 10 times. And then they said, look, we're really sorry, but can you go back and then finish again for the camera so you can cross the tape? And I'm like, yes, I can do that. I've never gotten to cross a tape before. This is so cool. And yeah, that's kind of how it went.
Surreal. So in the article that they published about you on Outside, there was a good quote that I want to read and have you comment on. You said, I worry that stories like mine, while inspiring to some, can be frustrating or even discouraging to others. They can paint a rosy picture and set unrealistic expectations. Like new moms should be able to bounce back and win 100Ks. Say more about that.
So the response to this story has mainly been positive. Lots of moms going like, hell yeah. Even Sharon Stone commented on one of the stories saying, yes, and we can run countries too.
Wow.
So loved that. I was like, okay, I'm dead now. But there have been some negative comments. Some of them have been quite misogynistic. You know, does she spend any time with her baby? I hope my daughter never sees this picture because this is, exactly what we shouldn't be doing. Couldn't she have run the race the next year?
God, the internet just is terrible. Yeah. My God.
From women as well. And like, oh, she's just breastfeeding for clout. Honestly, I don't know anyone who breastfeeds for clout. It's not worth it. But yeah, then there were a whole bunch of, and then there were some people who were genuinely concerned about Pepper because they thought I had run 100 kilometers with Pepper and they were worried about shaken baby syndrome. Yeah. Hilarious. But then there were the new moms, and I found it sad, but also interesting that immediately when they heard the story, they felt badly about themselves. And they were like, I barely was able to shower today, or, I got up the energy to be able to walk to my friend's house and that's all I did. This makes me feel like shit. And that is not the feeling that I want women to have. But it told me that, this is the result of kind of a patriarchal society that pits us against one another in competition. It also is a comment to me on how much scrutiny, judgment, and pressure there is on new moms and how we spend our time and all of the expectations that are there. We have to be perfect moms. We have to go back to our careers. We have to get our pre-baby body back. And women are feeling this pressure. And so then they see this story where, I'm not only winning, but I'm winning with breastfeeding and 6 months after. And they just think, God, this is going to be used against us. This is going to be used to, prove that I'm not doing enough. And what I would rather us talk about is like, how do we open up more space to give new moms the choice to just navigate motherhood the way, in the time that they want to, and in the way that they want to. For me, it's running 100K. I feel awesome. I've also been blessed with having parental leave for the last 6 months. I've never had 6 months off of work. This has been great.
Sounds amazing.
Right?
Yeah, I need to take paternity leave. And I mean, Harmony needs to take maternity leave still too. Yes, our son's almost 3, for God's sake.
Exactly. So yeah, I have a lot of empathy for the moms that kind of reacted negatively to this story, because I felt that myself when I was pregnant. People were sending me stories of this, like it was a fencer in the Olympics who was 7 months pregnant and competing. And I couldn't even keep a meal down. And I'm like, oh, dear God. And I'm now kind of reflecting on that reaction because I don't want to have that reaction in the future. Yeah. And I could fall on my face in Hardrock and maybe this is it. Maybe I have one race and that's it, whatever. But I really think the the obsession that we have over women's bodies and women's time, particularly as new moms, it's got to stop. It's got to stop.
Yeah, everybody's experience is so different. Coming back to something you said earlier, you're on the board of the Hardrock 100, where I think you were instrumental in helping them evolve their policies. You just said that you're working with UTMB in a commentary capacity, but I wondered if your experience at Snowdonia had inspired any new thoughts about somebody like you who does have to take sort of an involuntary leave from the sport to pursue building a family, which ultimately puts you in the third wave. Yeah. Is there anything that came to mind about how you might be able to help other mothers avoid that situation, or how UTMB might be able to avoid their policy based on that experience?
It's something that actually the Pro Trail Runners Association and She Races, led by Sophie Power, they're already working on with UTMB. And that is a way of kind of pausing. When women are going through pregnancy, you can pause your UTMB index so that if you've got this break in racing, you're not penalized for it when you come back into the sport. It's kind of like, you can do this with some airline statuses. I didn't know, but John actually took advantage of this. You can pause
I'm a huge airline status guy. Yeah. United all the way, you know. Star Alliance, proud and loyal.
I'm Turkish, and Turkish does not have a pause, but it's Star Alliance. Yeah, so it's this idea of just putting on pause. I think some of the things that I'm not sure is being worked on, and it's tricky, but that race at Transvolcania, like, there's got to be a way that you can allow exceptions for people who have been pregnant the whole year that you're required a qualifier.
Yeah.
To show that, you know, you can run the race. And I know it's tricky, and people say that, you know, it's to prove that you're physically fit enough, but I mean, you could be physically fit in January 2024, run a 50K, and then 18 months later, you know, have just sat on a couch. So I don't think that argument really holds weight. But we're getting there. You know, the pregnancy deferrals are becoming more and more common, becoming more and more generous. And that's something we changed at Hardrock. We had a pregnancy deferral policy, but when I needed to take advantage of it myself, I had noticed under the old policy that while you could defer for 3 years, you would need to requalify. So it didn't really give you a good 3 years. And now you've got 5 years to be able to use your deferral, and you don't have to requalify. So I think the more women that we have kind of finding these loopholes, finding these gaps, I should say, the better the policies will be.
Awesome. Okay, so you became famous for the phrase "get in the boat." For those who don't know what that means, go Google it or listen to our previous podcast where I think we talked about it. But at the end of 2024, you posted a beautiful picture of you and Pepper not long after she was born. And it finished with another phrase that I feel you could become famous for. That is, "it can all go right."
Yeah.
What did you mean by that? Because I think this is a good way to bring the whole thing full circle. Multiple years struggling with fertility, building a family, now with a beautiful daughter and a huge 100K victory. Sometimes it can all go right.
Yeah. I think I had actually first used that phrase after I'd gotten pregnant through IVF. And I was so nervous about whether it would stay. And all I could think about was the worries. What if I lose it? What if I miscarry? What if there's something wrong with the baby? What if I have stillbirth? And then at some point I thought, but what if it all goes right? And, you know, we can twist ourselves into not thinking about all of the bad things that can happen. And sometimes we just need to realize that if something bad happens, you'll deal with it at the time. And maybe it's just helpful to think, but what if it all goes right? And so when Pepper was born, I was like, damn, it all went right. It all went right. And Yeah, I do, I guess, have that phrase kind of in my head when I start worrying about something, whether it's work or, an upcoming race. And Snowdonia was kind of the example of that. It all went right. I mean,
Yeah.
it was the winner of the Cocodona 250, I think, who said, look, there's no such thing as a perfect race, but that was pretty damn perfect. I kind of felt that way about Snowdonia. There's no perfect race, but it all went right.
It's just dawning on me that Stephanie Case is going to have to do Cocodona at some point.
Oh yeah. It's a bit flat though.
Yeah, right. A little too flat for you. I do
runny.
love this though, and it's a good way to start winding down, because I'm sort of the consummate pessimist who's always worried about the worst case scenario. And if you reframe that and what if it all goes right, I think that's a good way to maybe even manifest the good things happening in your life. My wife, Harmony, actually has a phrase that we often throw around. What if something amazing happens, is what she said. Just like, what if something amazing happened? To the point where we've abbreviated it just to WISAH, WISAH, and we'll occasionally text it to one another. And I do think it's a nice thing and a similar sentiment. Okay, that's so before we wind down, what are we, like 6 weeks till Hardrock now? Tell us about how you're thinking about your second loop in the San Juans.
Yeah, and it's a loop in the opposite direction, so that'll be fun. The logistics over the next 6 weeks are tricky because I might be going back to work earlier than I thought. So now I'll have training, baby, work pressures. And I'm starting altitude training. So I'm sleeping in the hypoxic tent on a mattress on the floor with Pepper on a mattress right outside the tent. So we're separated by a piece of plastic. And then when I hear in the night, I could just pop a boob out and feed her and then go back in. It's tricky. But I'm just excited. I'm going to start heat training. I've got a treadmill on the way. I'm just going to throw everything I've got at these next few weeks and just try to go have fun out there and really celebrate the fact that I'm going to be back at Hardrock with a baby, with my baby.
Yeah.
With my
baby.
Dude,
it makes me want to cry because it's just jogging my memory. When I did Hardrock in 2023, Rhodes, he was not quite 1 year old. And I spent 2.5 hours sleeping at Chapman, desperately wanting to drop out. The only reason I kept going is because I had this vision of kissing the rock with my son. And you're going to get to do that with Pepper.
I'm really excited.
Nothing better.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe last thing before winding down here, Steph, I appreciate all your time. I was looking just at the organization Free to Run, which we talked about in a previous podcast, and went back and revisited the film. And we have not spoken in podcast format since the film came out a couple of years ago, but I went and looked. It's got over 150,000 views now on YouTube. So maybe in closing, if there's anything you want to share about the organization itself or any powerful stories that have emerged from the film and the impact that it had, is there anything you can share there?
Yep. And I've got two things I want to end on. So I'm going to add one on for you.
Please.
The Free to Run film, it's a film that was supposed to follow this expedition of Afghan women from my charity Free to Run in the Wakhan corridor in Afghanistan. But then unfortunately, tragedy hit and the Taliban took over the country. And so the film became a story about two incredible Afghan women who had to evacuate from the country, and their journey with running and with navigating life as refugees, while I was kind of dealing with all of that and then training up for Tour de Glacier, this 450 kilometer race in Italy. And we had a great run in film festivals. So the the count online actually doesn't really show the reach because it was in about 20 film festivals, which we were really excited about.
It won a bunch of awards too.
Yeah, it did. It won a bunch of awards, and that's thanks to Carrie and Tim Hyman of Dreamlands Media. Incredible. So Free to Run is an organization I started over 10 years ago in Afghanistan, and we really work to advance gender equity through running and outdoor adventure and leadership for adolescent women and girls in areas of conflict. And we are still in Afghanistan. We are also in Iraq and in Palestine. And honestly, there's so many stories that come out of the programs that we run in these countries of, girls who suddenly have new confidence. They have new plans for their future. They have just a totally new outlook on life through what they learn through running and through all of the leadership training that we provide. But it's not only the effects on the women and the girls, it's their parents, their brothers and sisters, their community members, because in areas of conflict, that's where the gender discrimination is the highest. And so what we try to help do is actually change the ideas that people have of the roles that women and girls should be playing through the act of running outdoors and everything that comes with it. And so I am actually very excited about the fact that I'm working with Carrie and Tim again on our second film. So we are in the third and final year of filming, and it is about running and all of these pregnancy challenges. Yes.
Whoa, I had no idea.
Awesome.
Okay.
Yeah. It's going to be awesome. Team me up for...
Wow, what a story they have on their hands. I hope they were out on the Snowdonia racecourse here.
We've got people that got footage. Yeah, it follows basically my path through pregnancy loss, IVF, eventually a pregnancy, and also the story of one other runner, Sophie Woods. And her path winds up a bit differently. But I think it'll speak to a lot of people who have been going through any kind of path, whether in trying to become parents successfully or not, and how running kind of the role that running plays in that, either in helping to deal with grief, in helping to celebrate triumphs. And yeah, given the reaction from Snowdonia, I think it's going to be a hit. I hope.
So was there something else you wanted to end on there?
Yeah.
That was it. Okay.
Do I need something
Stephanie,
else?
No, I just wanted to make sure that we didn't wind down without covering all the important stuff. But
am I going to see you at Hardrock?
I was just going to say, Stephanie Case, thank you so much for coming back on the show. Good luck in the next 6 weeks, and we'll see you in Silverton.
Nice. I can't wait. It's going to be great.